How would you describe yourself? Are there one or two phrases that would really capture who you are? And this is not a test. There aren't any bad answers, but can you think of some words that would just describe the essence of who you are? For years, I would describe myself as a professional musician. Just musician wasn't enough. I had to emphasize the professional part. That's who I saw myself being, in my own opinion. Now, I want to start out by saying that the opinion we have of ourselves, the way we describe ourselves, might not be the way others would describe us. Might not be the way God would describe us. I want to tell you about somebody who had a huge impact on my life. And then I'll tell you how he described himself. Russell Wiley was the band director at the University of Kansas from 1934 to 1968. He took a small, run-of-the-mill group of musicians who practiced on the stage of KU's basketball gym, a group that had poor equipment and even worse uniforms. And he turned them into one of the top 2 or 3 university bands in the country that ended up having the best equipment and the best facilities. Mr. Wiley was an extremely talented musician, and he was a world-class conductor. He was a guest conductor of the top bands and orchestras all over the world. It was said of him that he could get more out of a group of musicians than anyone else. He inspired musicians to play way above their abilities. When I was in his bands from 1961 to 68, he was considered as one of the top 2 college band directors in the United States. He was highly decorated and acclaimed by his peers and everyone in the music world. He'd been a university and a military band director before coming to KU in 1934. He was an innovator and a visionary. He started the Midwestern Music and Art Camp in 1934, and it grew at KU to be the greatest recruiting tool that the university maybe ever had. At its zenith, the camp was 6 weeks long each summer, and it included bands and orchestras and choirs and jazz bands and private lessons and science and math and art and dance and other divisions that included over 2,000 top high school students from every state in the Union each summer. Now, each week the bands and orchestras would have a different guest conductor, the finest from all over the world. A huge percentage of the campers, many from out of state like me, ended up coming to KU. Mr. Wiley was the founding director of the camp, and he was the KU band director. During his years here, the University of Kansas Band was one of the top bands in the country. At KU, after the chancellor and the basketball and the football coaches, he was arguably the most recognized and revered person on campus. He was friends with President Eisenhower and with governors and senators and cabinet members. He had more power at KU than most of the deans. He employed top faculty members from each department each summer and paid them well. They didn't get paid in the summer, and so they really appreciated that. And he brought a lot of money and students to KU. He was always a perfect gentleman. I never heard him speak harshly of anyone. He was kind and generous, had a good sense of humor, didn't take himself too seriously, and was just a wonderful person. Now, in thinking of Mr. Wiley, you could describe him in all the ways that I just mentioned and many, many more. But to find out what he was really like, who he really was, what motivated him, you would need to spend some time with him, get to know him personally, observe him in action, which I was privileged to do. But to find out who he was at the core, you needed to listen to what he had to say about himself, what was important to him, what his life was all about, what he dedicated his life to. Now, I mentioned that he was one of the top 2 band directors in the country, my opinion anyway. The other was Dr. William Ravelli at Michigan University. They were about the same age and had similar musical reputations, but Dr. Ravelli was like an old-school football coach. He yelled at people, he was very harsh and demanding and criticized people and put them down publicly. Mr. Wiley was not like that at all. Well, one summer, Mr. Wiley brought Dr. Ravelli in as a guest conductor. Guest conductors would come in for 7 days. They'd rehearse every day and then have a concert the final night. Well, the second day of rehearsals, Dr. Ravelli was extremely hard on the trumpet section. There was a hard piece that they were playing. They were having trouble with it, so he went right down the line from the first chair trumpet player to the others, had them try to play this piece that they hadn't seen before. They couldn't play it very well, and he just ridiculed them, was extremely harsh on them. He got down to one of the last chair players and just publicly humiliated this young man, probably a sophomore in high school, because the kid had a trumpet that his parents had bought at Sears. It wasn't a brand name like Kahn or Selmer or something like that. I was there, watched it happen, and it was just an awful, degrading situation. There was just total hush in the room. Well, he went ahead and finished the rehearsal. The next day at rehearsal time, Mr. Wiley took the podium, and he said, Dr. Ravelli won't be with us anymore. I'll be doing his music. Let's pick up with this same piece of music. That was it. He had sent Dr. Ravelli home. His contemporary, his peer, one of the top 2 band directors in the country. He didn't badmouth him publicly to us. He just didn't let him have any more influence on his students. Well, I was working for Mr. Wiley then, and I was in his office later that day, and he called me in and he said, Paul, what I'm all about is building up and encouraging students to be all they can be. I want to empower kids, and I want to give them confidence musically and help them reach musical heights that they never imagined, and then I want that to transfer into every area of their life. Well, his help didn't just stop with the band. He got students like me jobs. He opened doors for non-music major kids to get accepted in other programs, and he used his considerable influence to help students after college. He described himself as helping people become all they could be in every area of their life. Music just happened to be the tool that he had to work with. One day, while I was working for him, I think I was a junior in college, and so I was a student and I was playing music as well as working for him. And I was supposed to have the music on the stands for a concert for the camp band one Saturday afternoon. At the same time, I was playing in a pit orchestra for a musical in a building, part of the building right next to where the band was going to be playing. I totally spaced out my job for Mr. Wiley's band. Well, I realized that when I saw him, this distinguished gentleman in his late 60s, in a tuxedo, carrying this big box of music that I was supposed to have already brought over and put the music out, rushing in to take it and set it out for the kids who were already sitting in their chairs in the audience there watching. He saw me playing in this orchestra, and he knew that I saw him. Do you know what he said to me afterwards about how I let him down and how he had to do my work? Nothing. Ever. But I never did that again. He gave me grace. By the way, he was a believer and a leader in his church. I didn't know that till a few years after that. So now, getting a picture of my mentor and teacher, Mr. Wiley, realizing his achievements and his honors and everything, but seeing how he would describe himself, might you describe yourself differently now than you did earlier? Now, think about this. How would you describe God? People usually use the word glory to describe God. In the next part of this week's 3-part series, we're going to look at how we describe God and how God describes himself.